He walked into the ballroom with his hand on another woman's waist, wearing the smile of a man who thought he owned the world. Julian Thorne believed he had successfully traded up, swapping his quiet, modest wife for a younger, louder, flashier model. He thought the invitation to the prestigious winter solstice gala in Vienna was his crowning achievement, proof that he had finally climbed to the top of the social ladder. He didn't know the invitation wasn't an honor, it was a summons. And the woman standing at the top of the marble staircase, wearing the diamond tiara and commanding the attention of kings. She wasn't just the host. She was the wife he'd discarded like trash 3 years ago. Tonight wasn't a party, Julian. It was an execution. The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when Julian Thorne threw his freedom party at the Pierre Hotel in New York. It was a Tuesday. He remembered the day specifically because the market had closed high, and he felt invincible. "You're better off, mate," his business partner, Ricard, had said, clinking his glass of scotch against Julian's. Anastasia was nice, but she was dead weight. A man in your position, aiming for the senior partnership at BlackRock, needs a woman who shines, not a librarian who prefers knitting to networking. Julian nodded, smoothing the lapel of his Armani suit. He looked across the room at Tiffany. She was 23, blonde, and laughed with her head thrown back in a way that ensured every man in the room looked at her throat. She was an influencer with 2 million followers, and hanging off her arm felt like wearing a Patek Philippe watch. It was a statement. He thought about Anastasia, his wife of 5 years. Anna. She was quiet, almost painfully so. She worked at an antique book restoration shop in the East Village. She wore oversized sweaters, made soup from scratch, and never wanted to go to the galas or the charity auctions that fueled Julian's ego. When he told her he was leaving her for Tiffany, she hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown a vase. She had simply looked at him with those unsettlingly clear, grey eyes and said, "Are you sure this is the life you want, Julian? Once you leave this apartment, the door locks behind you. Forever." "I'm sure," he had sneered, handing her a check for $100,000. Hush money, he called it, though she had practically no one to talk to. "Buy yourself some new cardigans, Anna. Don't contact me." That was 3 years ago. Since then, Julian's career had skyrocketed. He had moved from New York to London, orchestrating high-stakes mergers. He and Tiffany were engaged, a spectacle documented daily on her Instagram. Life was perfect. Then came the envelope. It arrived on a rainy Tuesday at his office in Canary Wharf. It was heavy, made of thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold leaf edging. The wax seal was an intricate crest he didn't recognize, a double-headed eagle holding a rose. "To Mr. Julian Thorne and guest, you are cordially invited to the Winter Solstice Royal Gala, Hofburg Palace, Vienna, hosted by Her Serene Highness, the Grand Duchess of Caris." Julian's hands trembled slightly. The Caris family was old European money, not just rich, ancient, the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Getting an invite to the Hofburg Palace wasn't something you could buy. You had to be chosen. "Tiffany," he shouted when he got home to their Kensington penthouse, "pack your bags. We're going to Vienna." Tiffany squealed, snatching the invitation. "The Hofburg? Julian, this is it. The press will be there. Vogue covers this every year. I need a dress. I need something custom. Givenchy? No, maybe customized Versace." Julian smirked, pouring himself a drink. "Get whatever you want. We are going to show these old European aristocrats what new money looks like." He didn't wonder why he was invited. He assumed it was because of his recent deal with the Austrian Central Bank. He was Julian Thorne, the golden boy of finance. Of course they wanted him. He forgot the first rule of high-stakes poker. If you don't know who the mark is, it's you. Vienna in December was a fairy tale of snow and lights, but Julian was too busy barking at the limousine driver to notice. "Careful with the luggage," he snapped as the driver unloaded their trunks at the Hotel Sasha. Tiffany was already live streaming on her phone, pouting for the camera. "Hey guys, just landed in Vienna for a literal royal gala. My fiancé is such a boss. Show them the invite, baby." Julian flashed the gold-edged card, feeling a surge of pride. He checked his reflection in the hotel window. He had aged well. The grey at his temples made him look distinguished. He was ready to rub shoulders with dukes and earls. The night of the gala, the streets leading to the Hofburg Palace were blocked off. Crowds of onlookers pressed against the barricades, hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty. When Julian's Rolls-Royce pulled up to the red carpet, flashbulbs popped. Tiffany stepped out first. She was wearing a dress that left very little to the imagination, a sheer, sequined crimson gown with a slit that went up to her hip. It was loud. It was aggressive. In a club in Miami, it would have been a hit. Here, against the backdrop of Baroque architecture and snow, it looked jarring. Julian stepped out after her, buttoning his tuxedo. He offered her his arm, chin held high. "Chin up, Tiff. Let them envy us." They walked up the grand staircase. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ancient stone. But as they reached the top of the stairs and entered the great hall, the atmosphere shifted. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of a string quartet playing Mozart. The guests were dressed in impeccable taste, midnight blues, emerald greens, blacks and silvers. The jewelry was heavy and real. There were sashes of merit, medals of honor. When Tiffany walked in, heads turned. But not with the admiration Julian was used to. A dowager countess near the entrance raised a lorgnette to her eyes, whispered something to a general standing next to her, and they both chuckled softly. "They're staring," Tiffany whispered, squeezing Julian's arm too tight. "They love the dress." "Of course they do," Julian murmured, though a prickle of unease ran down his spine. He scanned the room for a friendly face. He spotted Arthur Sterling, a rival banker from London. Julian steered Tiffany toward him. "Arthur, good to see you," Julian boomed, his voice echoing a little too loudly in the refined acoustic space. Arthur turned, his eyes widening slightly as he took in Tiffany's dress. "Julian, I didn't expect to see you here." "Invited, just like you," Julian said, puffed up. The Grand Duchess must have heard about the Vienna merger. Arthur took a sip of champagne, looking at Julian with a strange mix of pity and amusement. "The Grand Duchess? Julian, do you know who the Grand Duchess is?" "Some old matriarch, I assume." Julian laughed. "Probably needs investment advice." Arthur choked on his drink. "Right. Well, good luck, Julian. You're going to need it." Arthur excused himself quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Julian frowned. "Jealousy," he muttered to Tiffany. "Pure jealousy." They moved deeper into the room. Julian tried to network, but the conversations were slippery. He'd approach a group of dignitaries, introduce himself, and the conversation would politely die. It was as if there was an invisible glass wall between him and the true elite. "I'm bored," Tiffany whined, checking her phone. "There's no signal in here. And where is the host? I want a selfie with a duchess." "Patience," Julian hissed. "Look, the trumpets are raising." At the far end of the hall, the massive double doors to the royal balcony were opening. The music stopped. A hush fell over the 1,000 guests. A master of ceremonies, dressed in full livery, struck a staff against the floor 3 times. "Ladies and gentlemen, pray silence for the hostess of the evening, the patroness of the arts, the keeper of the winter seal, Her Serene Highness, the Grand Duchess, Anastasia of Caris." Julian froze. The name bounced around his skull like a bullet. Anastasia? No, it couldn't be. Anastasia was a common name. It was a coincidence. Then she stepped out. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light, embroidered with silver thread that looked like constellations. On her head sat a tiara of diamonds and sapphires, so large they looked fake. She stood tall, regal, her posture perfect. But it was the face that made Julian's knees buckle. The glasses were gone. The messy bun was replaced by sleek, intricate waves. But the eyes, those cool, grey, piercing eyes, were exactly the same. It was Anna. His Anna. The woman who clipped coupons. The woman who mended his socks. The woman he had thrown away for a model and a penthouse. Beside him, Tiffany squinted. She's pretty. Old-fashioned, though. Who is she? Julian couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. Anastasia scanned the crowd. She didn't look nervous. She looked bored, powerful. And then her gaze stopped. It locked onto Julian across the sea of people. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply raised one eyebrow, a millimeter of movement that screamed more authority than Julian had ever possessed in his life. She turned to the microphone. "Welcome, friends," she said. Her voice was the same soft alto, but amplified. It sounded like thunder. "And welcome to those who believe they belong here." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He wanted to run, but his feet were lead. "Babe, what's wrong?" Tiffany asked, snapping her gum, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet hall. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "That's," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "That's my ex-wife." Tiffany laughed, a loud, braying sound. "That? The Queen of whatever?" "Julian, stop joking. You said your ex was a frumpy librarian." "She was," Julian hissed, grabbing Tiffany's elbow to silence her. "I don't know what this is. A trick. It has to be a trick." He watched as Anastasia descended the staircase. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. Men bowed, women curtsied. She moved with a grace he had never seen in their 5 years of marriage. How? His mind raced. How is this possible? He replayed their marriage in his head, the small apartment, her vagueness about her family. "My parents passed away when I was young," she had said. "I was raised by my grandmother in the country." She never said which country. She never said her grandmother was a queen. He remembered how she spoke 3 languages fluently. He had mocked her for reading French poetry, calling it useless. He remembered how she knew which fork to use at fancy dinners, correcting him gently, which he always resented. She was royalty the whole time. And she had hidden it. Why? Anastasia reached the bottom of the stairs. She was surrounded by a phalanx of admirers, but she held up a hand, whispering something to a guard. The guard nodded and began walking straight toward Julian. "Oh, God," Julian muttered. "She's going to kick us out." "Let her try," Tiffany said, fluffing her hair. "I have 2 million followers. I'll ruin her online." The guard, a man who looked like he carved statues with his bare hands, stopped in front of them. "Mr. Thorne?" "Yes?" Julian squeaked. "Her Highness requests your presence in the blue drawing room. Private audience." Tiffany stepped forward. "I'm coming too." The guard didn't even look at her. "The invitation is for Mr. Thorne only." "I am his fiancée!" Tiffany shrieked. A few nearby guests turned to look, their expressions filled with disdain. "Wait here, Tiff," Julian said, sweating. Let me smooth this over. It's probably a misunderstanding." He followed the guard through the crowd, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes on his back. They walked through a corridor lined with portraits of ancestors, all of whom had Anastasia's nose or her chin. The guard opened a heavy oak door and gestured Julian inside. The room was smaller, intimate, with a roaring fire. Anastasia stood by the fireplace, her back to him. She was looking at a painting of a snowy landscape. "You're late, Julian," she said, not turning around. "You always were. Remember our second anniversary. You were 2 hours late because you were closing a deal. You missed the dinner I cooked." Julian straightened his jacket, trying to summon the arrogance that usually served him so well. "Anna." Or, "Highness? What is this farce? You're a book restorer from the East Village." She turned slowly. The diamonds on her head caught the firelight, creating a halo of terrifying brilliance. "I am Anastasia Maria Romanov Montclair, Grand Duchess of Caris. Book restoration was a hobby, a way to live a normal life, to see if I could be loved for me, and not the crown." She took a step closer. The scent of her perfume, jasmine and cold rain, hit him. It was the same perfume she wore when they were married, but now it smelled expensive, dangerous. "I gave up my title to marry you, Julian," she said softly. "I abdicated my responsibilities because I fell in love with a charming, ambitious boy I met in a coffee shop. I wanted a simple life." Julian felt a lump in his throat. You were rich? This whole time?" Anastasia laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Rich? Julian, your net worth is a rounding error in my family's trust fund. I lived on a budget because I wanted to build a life with you. I wanted us to be partners." She picked up a crystal glass of wine. "But you didn't want a partner, did you? You wanted a prop, and when you thought the prop was too dull, you threw it away for a shinier one." "I loved you, Anna," Julian lied, stepping forward. He instinctively turned on the charm, the same charm he used on investors. "We had good times. I was just lost, stressed." "Don't," she snapped. The command was so sharp, Julian froze. "Don't insult my intelligence. You left me because you thought I held you back. You told me I was small. You told me I didn't understand the world of power." She gestured around the opulent room. "Look around, Julian. Do I look small to you now?" Julian looked at the tapestries, the gold, the history. He felt incredibly, shrinking small. "Why invite me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "To rub it in? To show off?" "No," Anastasia said, taking a sip of wine. "I invited you because I needed to sign off on the acquisition of your firm." Julian blinked. "What?" "BlackRock isn't making you a senior partner, Julian. My family's holding company, Caris Ventures, just bought the majority stake in your division. I am your new boss." The silence in the room was absolute. The fire crackled. You own my job." "I own your career," she corrected. "And I was curious. I wanted to see if the man who broke my heart had grown. If he had become a better man." She looked him up and down, her eyes landing on the door where Tiffany was presumably still waiting. "I see you haven't. You brought her. To the Hofburg." "She's my fiancée," Julian said defensively, though his heart wasn't in it. "She's a liability," Anastasia said coolly, "and she's currently live-streaming in the main hall, trying to steal a silver spoon. My security is watching her." Julian buried his face in his hands. This was a nightmare. "So, what now?" Julian asked, looking up. "You fire me." "Firing you would be too easy," Anastasia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Tonight is a gala for charity, high-stakes poker, auctions, networking. I'm going to give you a chance, Julian. Survive the night. Keep up with this world you so desperately wanted to be part of. If you can last until midnight without embarrassing yourself or my company, you keep your job. If not," she let the sentence hang. "And if not? If not, I strip you of your assets. I blacklist you from every financial institution in Europe, and I reveal to the press exactly how you treated the Grand Duchess of Caris when she was just a wife." She walked past him to the door, her velvet skirts swishing. "Welcome to the high life, Julian. Try not to drown." She opened the door and walked out, leaving him alone, with the fire and the crushing realization that he was totally, utterly screwed. Julian stumbled out of the drawing room, dazed. He needed a drink. He needed a stiff scotch. He found Tiffany near the buffet, arguing with a waiter. "I asked for a Diet Coke, not water," she was saying loudly. "We do not serve a cola, madam," the waiter said, his face a mask of polite disgust. "Tiffany, stop!" Julian grabbed her arm, harder than he intended. "Ow! Where have you been? Who was that lady?" "That lady," Julian hissed into her ear, "is my boss, and she is the queen of this God-forsaken place. So shut up, put your phone away, and for the love of God, stop touching things." Tiffany looked at him, shocked. She had never seen Julian like this, sweaty, pale, terrified. "You're hurting me." "I am trying to save us," he said. "We have to blend in." "Blend in?" Tiffany laughed nervously. "Julian, look at us. We're the best-looking people here." Julian looked around. He saw a man in a wheelchair talking to the Prime Minister of Italy. The man wore a suit that cost more than Julian's car. He saw a woman in her 70s wearing a necklace of emeralds the size of eggs. These people didn't care about looks in the Instagram sense. They cared about power, lineage, dignity. Tiffany, with her spray tan and sequins, looked like a neon sign in a cathedral. And Julian, with his new money arrogance, looked like a fraud. "Come on," Julian said. "We need to go to the auction. Anna, Her Highness, said I have to survive the night." They moved to the great hall where the charity auction was beginning. The auctioneer was a famous British comedian. "Next item," he announced. "A vintage 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO. Bidding starts at 20 million euros. Julian gulped. 20 million? That was his entire net worth. A hand went up. It was Anastasia. She was sitting in a golden chair at the front, sipping champagne. 25 million, she said casually. 30, called out a Saudi prince. 35, Anastasia countered, not even looking at the prince. Julian watched in horror. She was throwing around millions like they were pennies. This was the woman who used to get excited when strawberries were on sale at the bodega. 40 million, the prince said. Anastasia turned in her chair. She looked back at Julian. She locked eyes with him. 50 million, she said clearly, and I'll donate the car to the local orphanage to be sold for food. The room erupted in applause. The prince bowed his head in defeat. Julian felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Rickard, his old business partner, the one who told him to leave Anna. Rickard was pale. "Julian," Rickard whispered. "Did you know?" "No," Julian said. "She's the majority shareholder of the bank, Julian. She just fired the entire board of directors via email 10 minutes ago." Julian's stomach dropped. "What?" "She kept you and me," Rickard said, trembling. "She said she has a special game for us." Just then, the music changed. A waltz. The master of ceremonies announced, "Her Highness requests the first dance with Mr. Julian Thorne." The spotlight swung through the room, blindingly bright, and landed on Julian. He froze. Tiffany gasped. "Why does she want to dance with you?" Tiffany asked, jealous. "Because," Julian whispered, terrified. "She wants to step on my toes." He walked onto the dance floor. His legs felt like jelly. Anastasia was waiting for him in the center of the room. She looked 10 feet tall. "May I?" she asked, extending a gloved hand. Julian took it. Her hand was cold. I don't know how to waltz, he whispered. You know that. We danced to Uptown Funk at our wedding. I know. Anastasia smiled cruelly. Follow my lead, and try not to trip. Every camera in Europe is watching. The music swelled. Strauss's Blue Danube. Anastasia began to move. She spun him with surprising strength. You look terrible, Julian, she said as they whirled. Is the guilt eating you? Or is it the fear of poverty? Please, Anna, he begged, struggling to keep his footing. Can we talk about this? Privately? We are talking, she said, spinning him faster. You wanted to be seen, Julian. Now everyone sees you. Look at them. Julian glanced at the crowd. They were whispering, pointing. They know, Anastasia whispered in his ear. I told them. Everyone here knows you are the man who cheated on the Grand Duchess with an Instagram model. Julian missed a step. He stumbled. Anastasia held him up with an iron grip, preventing him from falling, but the clumsiness was obvious. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Clumsy, she tutted. You never did have any balance. She leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear. By the way, your fiancé is currently trying to network with the Duke of Northumberland. He is notoriously conservative. I give it 2 minutes before she gets you escorted out. No, Julian gasped. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Anastasia counted the waltz rhythm. Oh, look, there it goes. Julian spun around just in time to see Tiffany shouting at an elderly man with a cane. Security guards were swarming. Julian! Tiffany screamed across the ballroom. Julian! Tell them who we are. Tell them we're rich. The music stopped. The entire room went silent. Anastasia let go of Julian's hand. She stepped back, smoothing her dress. I think your guest is leaving, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice projecting to the rafters. You have a choice. You can leave with her and never return to this world. Or you can stay, finish the night, and beg for your career. Julian looked at Tiffany, who was being dragged away by security, kicking and screaming about her subscriber count. Then he looked at Anastasia. Beautiful, powerful, terrifying. He looked at the crowd of billionaires and royals. Julian Thorne made his choice. He turned his back on Tiffany. I'll stay, he said. Tiffany's scream of betrayal echoed through the hall as the heavy doors slammed shut behind her. Anastasia smiled. It was a smile of pure ice. I thought you might, she said. You always were a coward. Now, let the real games begin. The heavy oak doors closed, sealing the sound of Tiffany's screams outside. The ballroom was quiet again, save for the polite murmuring of the guests who had just witnessed a social execution. Julian stood alone near the pillar, his face burning. He had chosen his career over his fiancée. It was the pragmatic choice, the Julian Thorne choice, but the taste of it was ash in his mouth. Mr. Thorne, a voice rumbled. It was the large guard from earlier. Her Highness expects you in the library for the games. Julian straightened his tie, his hands shaking slightly. The games. Right. Poker. High stakes, the guard said, offering no smile. The library was a cavernous room, lined with books that smelled of centuries-old leather and dust. In the center sat a round mahogany table. Seated there were 3 men and 1 empty chair. There was Viktor Volkov, a Russian energy tycoon known for eating his competitors alive. There was Sir Alistair Sterling, the owner of the largest media conglomerate in Europe. And there was a man Julian didn't recognize, a silent, scarred man shuffling a deck of cards with terrifying precision. And standing at the bar, pouring a glass of whiskey, was Anastasia. Sit, Julian, she commanded. Julian sat. The chair was velvet, comfortable, but it felt like an electric chair. The buy-in, Volkov grunted, lighting a cigar, is 5 million. Julian choked. I don't have 5 million liquid on me. I know, Anastasia said, walking over and taking the seat opposite him. I put up your stake, Julian. Consider it a loan. If you win, you keep the pot. If you lose, you owe me. Owe you what? Julian asked, eyeing the cards. Everything, she whispered. Deal. The game was Texas Hold'em. Julian was a good player. He had paid for his MBA by hustling rich kids in dorm rooms. He knew how to read a bluff. He looked at Anastasia. Her face was a mask of porcelain perfection. He realized with a start that he had never really looked at her when they were married. He had looked past her. He didn't know her tells. The hands went by. Julian played conservatively, folding on bad hands, observing. He won a small pot against Sterling. His confidence began to creep back. This was math. He was good at math. So, Julian, Anastasia said casually, as the dealer flopped the cards, a king of hearts, a 10 of spades, and a 2 of clubs. Tell the table, how did we meet? Julian checked his cards. A pair of kings. A coffee shop, he muttered, tossing in a chip. University place. A coffee shop, Anastasia repeated, calling the bet. Romantic. I seem to recall I dropped my books, and you helped me pick them up. You told me you were going to run Wall Street one day. I did, Julian said. And I told you I wanted to write stories, she said. The turn card was a jack of hearts. But you told me stories don't pay the rent. Volkov folded. Sterling bet high. Julian called. Anastasia called. I was being realistic, Julian snapped, the alcohol and stress loosening his tongue. You were living in a fantasy world, Anna. Someone had to be the adult. The river card fell. It was the Queen of Hearts. The table went silent. Julian looked at his hand. He had 3 kings, a strong hand, but the board showed a potential straight flush for anyone holding the ace and 9 of hearts. Sterling checked. Julian looked at Anastasia. She was staring at the Queen of Hearts on the table with a strange sadness. She's bluffing, Julian thought. She's emotional. She's looking at the Queen and thinking about herself. She doesn't have the cards. All in, Julian said, pushing his chips forward. 5 million. Sterling folded immediately. Anastasia looked up, her grey eyes locked onto his. Are you sure, Julian? You always were overconfident when you thought you had the upper hand. I'm sure, he sneered, unless you want to fold, Your Highness. I never fold on a good investment, she said softly. I call. Julian flipped his cards triumphantly. 3 kings. Read 'em and weep. Anastasia didn't weep. She didn't even blink. She slowly turned her cards over. The ace of hearts. The 9 of hearts. A royal flush. Julian stared at the cards. The blood drained from his extremities. It wasn't just a loss. It was a statistical impossibility. It was an act of God. You lose, Anastasia said, raking in the chips. That puts you 5 million in debt to me. Plus interest. You cheated, Julian gasped. Volkov laughed, a deep barking sound. Cheated? Boy, the dealer works for MI6. Nobody cheats in this room but the devil. Anastasia stood up, towering over him. I didn't cheat, Julian. I just knew you. I knew you'd see the king and think you were royalty. But you forgot the Queen. You always forget the Queen. She leaned across the table, her diamond necklace swinging like a pendulum. You owe me 5 million euros. You can't pay it, which means I own your debts. I own your mortgage. I own the lease on that ridiculous car you parked outside. Technically, Julian, I own the clothes on your back. Julian slumped in his chair, defeated. What do you want? I want you to attend dinner, she said, smoothing her skirt. And I want you to smile. The main course is about to be served. The grand dining hall was a masterpiece of gold leaf and crystal. A table for 200 guests stretched the length of the room. Julian was seated, not at the head, but at the very far end, near the kitchen doors. It was the seat reserved for the least important person in the room. To his left was a deaf duke who fell asleep immediately. To his right was an empty chair where Tiffany should have been. The food was exquisite: caviar, truffle soup, pheasant. Julian couldn't eat a bite. He drank the wine, glass after glass, trying to numb the panic rising in his chest. Halfway through the meal, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center of the high table where Anastasia sat. She stood up, holding a champagne flute. "My esteemed guests," she began, "tonight we celebrate heritage, we celebrate truth, and we celebrate the shedding of dead weight." A polite ripple of applause. "Many of you know my story," Anastasia continued. "You know I spent 5 years in America, living as a commoner. It was an educational experiment. I wanted to understand what life was like for those who must struggle." She paused, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on the dark corner where Julian sat. "I learned that some people struggle with dignity, and others," her voice hardened, "struggle because their souls are hollow. I was married in America, to a man who is here tonight." Every head turned, 1,000 eyes bored into Julian. He wanted to slide under the table. "Mr. Julian Thorne," she said, "please stand up." Julian didn't move. "Stand up!" The command cracked like a whip. Julian scrambled to his feet, knocking over his wine glass. The red liquid stained the white tablecloth like blood. "This man," Anastasia said, gesturing to him like he was a museum exhibit, "told me I was boring. He told me I lacked ambition. When he left me, he gave me a check for $100,000. He called it a severance package. As if 5 years of devotion was a job he was firing me from." A gasp went through the room. The Dowager Countess looked ready to faint. "He flaunted his new life," Anastasia continued, her voice steady and cold. "He bought a penthouse. He bought a sports car. He bought a new fiancée. He thought he was a self-made man." She reached under the table and pulled out a remote. A large screen descended behind her. "But the truth is," she said, pressing a button, "Julian never made anything." Documents appeared on the screen. Bank transfers, emails. "I knew his firm was failing 3 years ago," Anastasia narrated. "He was about to be fired for incompetence. I didn't want him to fail. I loved him. So I used my private trust to funnel anonymous accounts into his portfolio. I bought the stocks he pitched. I hired the consultants who fixed his strategies." Julian stared at the screen. His biggest wins, the Kincaid merger, the Tech Start IPO. The names on the documents were shell companies: Caris Holdings, Romanoff Ventures, AMM Trust. "Me," Anastasia said. "It was all me, Julian. Every success you ever had, every bonus you ever earned. It was my money, moving from my right pocket to my left, just to keep your fragile ego intact." "No," Julian whispered. "That's a lie." "Is it?" She clicked the remote again. A video played. It was security footage from his office. It showed Julian bragging to Rickard. "I'm a genius, Rick. I can sell ice to Eskimos. Anna doesn't get it. She thinks luck is real. I am the luck." The room erupted in laughter. Cruel, aristocratic laughter. "You are not a genius, Julian," Anastasia said, cutting through the laughter. "You are a charity case, my favorite charity case. And when you left me, I stopped funding you. Look at your numbers for the last quarter." A graph appeared, a red line plummeting straight down. "You've been hemorrhaging money for 6 months. You are insolvent. You came to Vienna hoping to land a whale to save you, but the only whale here is me." She set her glass down. "And I am done feeding you." She sat down, the spotlight cut off. Julian stood in the darkness, the laughter of the room ringing in his ears. He realized then that he wasn't just broke. He wasn't just divorced. He was a fraud. His entire identity, the master of the universe, was a lie constructed by the wife he had discarded. He sank into his chair, the wet tablecloth soaking into his tuxedo. The applause that followed Anastasia's speech didn't sound like applause to Julian Thorne. It sounded like the rattling of dirt on a coffin. For the remainder of the evening, Julian sat in a paralysis of humiliation. The waiters, once so polite, now seemed to bypass his glass when refilling wine. The guests at the far end of the table, the deaf duke and a minor baronet, had shifted their chairs slightly, angling their backs toward him, as if failure was a contagious disease they could catch through the air. When the grandfather clock in the corner of the great hall struck midnight, the sound was a physical blow. The gala was over. The spell was breaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming, "carriages await in the courtyard." The room became a flurry of movement. Furs were retrieved, gloves were pulled on, and the air filled with the chatter of the elite making plans for after-parties in Monaco and Gstaad. Julian stood up, his legs stiff, his tuxedo stained with the red wine he had knocked over during his public dressing down, felt sticky and cold against his skin. It was a Brioni suit, worth £5,000, but right now it looked like a costume from a thrift store. He looked toward the head table. It was empty. Anastasia was gone. He turned to leave, aiming for the main doors, hoping to slip into the crowd and vanish. But before he could take 3 steps, a shadow fell over him. It was the head of security, the man with hands like sledgehammers. "Not that way, Mr. Thorne," the guard rumbled. His voice wasn't aggressive, just immovably solid. "I'm leaving," Julian said, his voice a raspy croak. "I'm just getting my coat." "Your coat has been retrieved for you," the guard said, holding out Julian's cashmere overcoat. "Her Highness has requested you use the west exit to avoid the press." Julian flinched. The press. Of course. They would be waiting at the front gates, hungry for the ex-husband who had been roasted by the Grand Duchess. He nodded, taking the coat. "Fine. Show me." The guard led him away from the warmth and the gold leaf of the ballroom. They walked down a long corridor, lined with portraits of the Carys ancestors. Julian felt their painted eyes tracking him. There was a duke from the 1700s who looked just like Anastasia. The same sharp chin, the same imperious stare. They knew, Julian thought. Generations of kings and queens are watching the pauper walk the plank. They passed through a heavy baize door, and the atmosphere changed instantly. The plush carpets were replaced by cold stone. The smell of perfume was replaced by the smell of floor wax and drafts. This was the service wing, the veins of the palace. "Here," the guard said, stopping at a heavy steel door reinforced with iron bands. He pushed it open. A blast of freezing wind hit Julian, stealing the breath from his lungs. It was snowing hard now, a thick, white curtain that erased the world. "She is waiting," the guard said, gesturing into the storm. Julian stepped out. It wasn't an alleyway, exactly. It was a private service courtyard, enclosed by high stone walls covered in ivy that had frozen into brittle sculptures. The only light came from a single, old-fashioned gas lantern mounted on the wall, casting long, flickering shadows against the snow. And there she stood. Anastasia was turned away from him, looking up at the swirling snow. She had changed out of the midnight blue ball gown. Now she wore a long, floor-length coat of white ermine that blended perfectly with the falling snow, making her look like a spirit. Her hair was still done up in the intricate royal style, the diamonds catching the lantern light. But her posture was different. The commanding queen of the ballroom was gone. In her place was a woman who looked tired. Julian took a step forward. The snow crunched loudly under his dress shoes. "Anna?" he whispered. She didn't turn immediately. She took a deep breath, watching a cloud of vapor rise from her lips. "It's peaceful out here, isn't it? Inside, it's all noise, calculations, strategies. But the snow doesn't care who you are. It buries the king and the beggar just the same." She turned slowly. Her face was pale, her grey eyes reflecting the gaslight. She looked at him, really looked at him, not with the anger she had shown at the poker table or the mockery she had displayed at dinner. She looked at him with a profound, crushing disappointment. "Why?" Julian asked, his voice trembling from the cold and the shock. "Why did you do it, Anna? You destroyed me, in front of the whole world. Was it just revenge? Did it feel good?" Anastasia sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 3 years of silence. "Revenge is a petty thing, Julian. It's for people who have nothing else. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it for closure." "Closure?" Julian let out a hysterical, jagged laugh. "You destroyed my reputation. You revealed I'm a fraud. How is that closure?" "Because you needed to see yourself," she said softly, stepping closer. The snow was settling on his shoulders, but he didn't brush it off. "For 5 years, and then for 3 years after that, you told yourself a story. The story was that Julian Thorne was a genius, a titan, a man held back by a boring wife. You believed that story so hard, you forgot what reality felt like." She reached into the deep pocket of her fur coat and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. "I had to break the mirror, Julian. I had to show you the cracks. Otherwise, you would have gone on forever, thinking you were a victim of my mediocrity." She held the envelope out to him. Julian looked at it suspiciously. His hands were numb. "What is this? Another lawsuit? A restraining order?" "Take it." He reached out, his fingers brushing against her glove. The leather was warm. He took the envelope. It felt heavy, substantial. "Open it," she commanded. Julian tore the seal with shaking fingers. He pulled out a stack of documents. He squinted in the dim light. The first was a deed, title of transfer, Penthouse 4B, Kensington High Street. The second was a bank document, loan forgiveness, 5,000 resgadosos, paid in full by Caris Trust. The third was a contract, employment guarantee, Julian Thorne, regional manager, Black Rock, London. Julian stared at the papers. The numbers swam before his eyes. You're giving me the apartment," he stammered. "And the debt? You're wiping the poker debt." "I don't want your money, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I never did. And I certainly don't want that apartment. It smells of her perfume and your desperation." "Then why?" He looked up, tears finally spilling over, hot tracks on his freezing face. "If you hate me, why save me?" "I don't hate you," Anastasia said. And that was the worst thing she could have said. Hate implies passion. Hate implies connection. "I pity you. You are a small man who wants big things, but you refuse to do the work to earn them. You want the view from the summit, but you want to take the helicopter, not the climb." She gestured to the papers in his hand. "This is me clearing the ledger. You are debt-free. You have a home. You have a job. You have exactly what you had before you met me. You are back to zero." "I don't want to be at zero," Julian shouted, the sound echoing off the stone walls. He dropped the papers into the snow and grabbed her shoulders. The guards by the door tensed, stepping forward, but Anastasia held up a hand to stop them. "I can change, Anna," Julian pleaded, gripping the soft fur of her coat. "I see it now. I see how powerful you are, how amazing you are. We can be a power couple. Imagine it. You with your crown, me with my drive. I can learn. I can be the husband you need. Take me back. Please, don't leave me in the cold." Anastasia looked down at his hands clutching her coat. She didn't pull away. She just looked at them as if they were dead leaves that had fallen on her. "You still don't get it," she whispered. "You don't want me, Julian. You want the spotlight that shines on me. You're looking at my crown, not my eyes." She gently, but firmly, peeled his fingers off her coat one by one. "The Anastasia you married is dead. You killed her with 1,000 small cuts. You killed her when you forgot her birthday. You killed her when you rolled your eyes at her poetry. You killed her when you brought another woman into our bed." She took a step back, creating a chasm between them that was only a few feet wide but felt like an ocean. "I am the Grand Duchess of Caris. My life is duty, history, and legacy. You? You are a man who just wants to be famous. We are not the same species anymore. I loved you," Julian sobbed, his resistance breaking. "Somewhere, deep down, I loved you." "I know," she said, and for a second her voice cracked. A flicker of the old Anna, the girl from the coffee shop, shone through. "I loved you too, Julian. I loved you enough to hide a kingdom for you. But love isn't enough. Not without respect." She straightened up, the mask of the queen sliding back into place. "Pick up your papers, Julian." He hesitated, then slowly knelt in the slush and gathered the wet documents. He clutched them to his chest like a shield. "Go home," she said. "Go back to London. Be a good manager. Find a nice girl who likes loud cars. Live a quiet, average life. There is no shame in being average, Julian. The only shame is pretending to be a king when you are a jester." She turned her back on him. "Goodbye, Julian." "Anna!" he called out one last time. She didn't stop. She walked toward the heavy steel door where the guard was waiting. The warmth of the palace spilled out for a brief second, a golden rectangle of light that promised champagne, music, and belonging. Anastasia stepped into the light. The guard looked at Julian one last time, a look of pure indifference, and then pulled the door shut. Clang. The sound was final. The heavy iron bolt slid home with a screech of metal. Julian was alone. The silence of the courtyard was deafening. The only sound was the wind howling through the ivy and the blood rushing in his ears. He stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, waiting for it to open, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to come back and tell him it was a test, and that he had passed by, showing humility. But the door stayed shut. The snow began to pile up on his shoulders. His hand, numb and shaking, went to his tuxedo pocket. His phone buzzed, and then buzzed again, and again. A continuous, angry vibration against his ribs. He pulled it out. The screen was cracked from when he had dropped it earlier, but the light was blinding in the dark alley. Notifications were cascading down the screen like a waterfall. Tagged in a post by Tiffany. EXO. Trending now. Your Julian Thorne over-party. Daily Mail. The Duchess and the Dud. How Julian Thorne lost a kingdom for an influencer. He tapped on Tiffany's video. It buffered for a second in the bad signal of the storm, then played. Tiffany's face filled the screen. She was sitting in the back of a luxury taxi, her makeup smeared, holding a glass of champagne that she had clearly stolen from the Gala. "Okay, guys," she hiccuped, looking into the lens. "Real talk. Julian is history. I just found out he's literally broke, like $0 broke. And his ex-wife, she's actual royalty, and she just destroyed him. It was hilarious. Anyway, I'm heading to an after-party with the Duke of Northumberland. He has a castle. So upgrade. Don't settle for less, ladies." By Julian Narwa Royal Gala. Julian scrolled down to the comments. User 123. Imagine fumbling a literal queen for a TikToker. LMAO. Finance Bro, UK. I worked with Thorne. Guy was always a fraud. Glad he got exposed. Anastan account. The way she looked at him at dinner. Chills. He's dead to her. He watched the view count tick up. 500,000. 600,000. 1 million. The world was laughing. Not with him. At him. He turned off the phone. The screen went black, reflecting his own face. Haggard, wet, pathetic. He looked at the papers in his hand. The deed to the apartment. It wasn't a gift. It was a coffin. She had given him back his old life, but she had stripped it of all meaning. He would go back to that apartment, and every time he looked at the walls, he would know he didn't earn them. He was a charity case. He put the papers in his pocket and turned toward the alley exit. The walk to the main road was only 100 yards, but it felt like miles. He emerged onto the streets of Vienna. The city was beautiful, dressed for Christmas. Garlands of pine and holly hung from the street lamps. Couples walked arm in arm, laughing, catching snowflakes on their tongues. A taxi with a glowing yellow light drove past. Julian raised his hand, a reflex. The driver slowed down, looked at Julian, at his soaked, ruined tuxedo, his hair plastered to his skull, the sheer aura of defeat radiating off him, and sped up again. Julian lowered his hand. He walked. He walked past the 5-star Hotel Sasha, where he had checked in like a conqueror 2 days ago. He didn't go in. He couldn't face the concierge. He kept walking, his Italian leather shoes slipping on the icy pavement, soaking his socks with freezing slush. He walked past the luxury boutiques, Gucci, Prada, Rolex, stores where he used to strut around, flashing his credit card. Now, the mannequins in the windows seemed to sneer at him behind the glass. He reached a bridge over the Danube River. The water below was black and churning. He stopped at the railing, looking down. He wasn't going to jump. He was too cowardly for that. Anastasia was right. He was a man of half measures. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the invitation. The thick, cream-colored card with the gold leaf edging. The double-headed eagle crest. To Mr. Julian Thorne and guest. He remembered the moment he opened it. The rush of adrenaline. The feeling that he had finally arrived. He crumpled the card in his fist, crushing the gold leaf, bending the crest. He squeezed it until his knuckles turned white, trying to crush the memory of the night along with it. He tossed the ball of paper over the railing. It fell silently, a tiny white speck against the vast darkness, and vanished into the black water of the Danube. Gone. Just like his ambition. Just like Anna. Julian turned up the collar of his coat against the wind. It offered no warmth. He was shivering, violently now. Average, he muttered to the empty bridge. The word hung in the air, a sentence and a verdict. He put his hands in his pockets, hunched his shoulders, and began the long trudge toward the train station. He would take the cheap train to the airport. He would fly economy. He would go back to his cubicle. Julian Thorne walked into the dark, a grey man in a grey world, disappearing into the snow as if he had never existed at all. Julian Thorne spent the rest of his life in a comfortable, mid-level purgatory. He kept his job, but he was never invited to another party. He never married again. Every time he saw a magazine cover with the Grand Duchess Anastasia on it, smiling, charitable, beloved, he felt a phantom pain in his chest, the ache of a man who held a diamond in his hand and mistook it for glass. He learned the hardest lesson of all. You can buy a suit, you can buy a car, and you can buy a ticket to the gala. But class? Class is knowing the value of what you have before you lose it. And royalty isn't about bloodlines, it's about character. Julian Thorne had neither. Wow, talk about a reality check. Julian definitely got served more than just dinner at that gala. What do you guys think? Did Anastasia go too far with the public humiliation, or did Julian deserve every single bit of it for how he treated her? Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. We drop new dramas every week that are juicier than a royal scandal. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you discard on your way up, because you might just meet them on your way down. See you next time.